The auctioneer's hammer struck wood 3 times, and Clara Brennan understood that everything she'd ever owned now belonged to strangers. She stood at the edge of the crowd gathered outside the general store in Ashford's Bend, watching men pour through her father's tools, women examine her mother's quilts with pursed lips and calculating eyes. The September wind carried dust across the street, coating her black morning dress in a fine layer of grit that made her look even more like something discarded. Nobody met her gaze. Nobody asked if she was hungry or had a place to sleep. They just kept bidding, kept taking, kept erasing every trace of the Brennan family from this corner of Montana territory, as if her parents had never drawn breath at all. $5 for the plow, someone called out. Clara turned away before she could see who bought it. Her father had worked that plow until his hands bled during their first spring here. He died holding those same hands against his chest 6 weeks ago when his heart finally gave out, and her mother had followed him into the ground just 2 weeks later, taken by the fever that had swept through town like God's own judgment. The banker had explained the situation with professional sympathy that felt more like rehearsal than genuine feeling. Her father owed more than the farm was worth. Everything had to be sold, everything. She had $17 sewn into the hem of her dress and nowhere to go. "Miss Brennan." Clara turned to find Reverend Michaels approaching, his wife trailing behind him with that expression women wore when they were about to offer charity they didn't really want to give. They stopped a respectful distance away, and Clara noticed how Mrs. Michaels kept her handkerchief pressed to her nose as if poverty might be contagious. "We've been discussing your situation," the Reverend said, "and we believe it would be best if you traveled to Billings. There's a boarding house there for young women in unfortunate circumstances. They teach sewing, laundering, respectable work." "I know how to sew," Clara said. "My mother taught me." "Yes, well," Mrs. Michaels sniffed. "The point is, dear, you can't stay here. It wouldn't be proper. A young woman alone, no family, no means. People talk." They already were talking. Clara had heard the whispers, seen the sideways glances. She was 23 and unmarried, which made her a spinster. She was suddenly poor, which made her desperate. And she was too pretty for her own good, which made her dangerous. That's what Mrs. Henderson had said to Mrs. Cole at the Mercantile yesterday, loud enough for Clara to hear. Too pretty for her own good, that one. Mark my words, she'll come to a bad end. "I'll think about Billings," Clara lied, because it was easier than arguing. The Reverend looked relieved. His wife looked skeptical. They both left without offering her dinner or a place to stay. Clara waited until the auction ended and the crowd dispersed before she started walking. She had no destination in mind, just a desperate need to move, to escape the pitying stares and whispered judgments. Her feet carried her past the church, past the saloon with its painted windows and tinny piano music, past the last row of houses, until there was nothing but prairie stretching toward mountains that looked purple in the late afternoon light. She didn't realize she was crying until the tears dripped off her chin and left dark spots on the front of her dress. The sound of wagon wheels made her look up. A flatbed wagon pulled by 2 draft horses was approaching from the north, moving slow and deliberate. 3 children sat in the back, 2 boys and a girl, and a man drove from the front, his hat pulled low against the sun. As they drew closer, Clara stepped off the road to let them pass, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. The wagon stopped beside her. "You lost, miss." The man's voice was rough like creek gravel, but not unkind. Clara looked up at him and had to squint against the sun. He was maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that needed trimming. His shirt was clean but patched at the elbows. Working hands held the reins with easy confidence. "No," Clara said, "just walking." Long way from town for just walking. His eyes, blue as deep water, studied her face with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. "You crying about something specific, or just crying in general?" The directness of the question startled a laugh out of her, short and bitter. "Everything got sold today, my family's farm, everything we owned." The man nodded slowly, like this explained something he'd been wondering about. In the back of the wagon, the 3 children stared at Clara with wide, solemn eyes. The girl couldn't have been more than 5, with tangled blonde hair and a dress that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric looked like. The boys were older, maybe 7 and 9, both dark-haired like their father, both watching her like she might bolt if they moved too quick. "You got people in town?" the man asked. "No. You got people anywhere?" Clara shook her head. The man was quiet for a long moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he glanced back at his children, seemed to have some kind of silent conversation with himself, and made a decision. "My name's Thomas Garrett. I got a ranch about 8 miles north of here. My wife passed last winter." He said it flat and factual, the way men did when emotion was still too close to the surface to risk examining. "These are my kids, Samuel, Jack, and Lily." Clara didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. "I need help," Thomas said bluntly. "Ranch needs work I can't do alone with 3 children underfoot. House needs keeping. Kids need someone who knows how to cook something besides beans and bacon. I can pay $20 a month plus room and board. It's respectable work. I'll sleep in the barn to keep things proper. Reverend can come out once a week if you want a chaperone for appearances. I just need someone who won't run off the first time things get hard." It was the strangest job offer Clara had ever received, delivered with all the romance of a livestock transaction. She should have said no, should have asked questions, demanded references, pointed out that working for a widower in the middle of nowhere was exactly the kind of thing that would make Mrs. Michaels faint straight into her herb garden. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm a good cook, and I know how to manage a house." "Then climb up." Thomas shifted over on the bench to make room, "unless you got a better offer waiting." Clara looked back toward town, toward the general store where everything her parents had built was being carted away by strangers. She looked at the 3 children in the wagon, at their patched clothes and hungry eyes, and the desperate hope starting to bloom on their faces. She climbed up. The ride to the Garrett Ranch passed in near silence. Thomas didn't seem inclined toward small talk, and Clara was too exhausted to make the effort. The children whispered to each other in the back, their voices rising and falling like birdsong. Once, Clara glanced over her shoulder and found all 3 of them staring at her with expressions of such naked longing it made her chest ache. The ranch appeared as the sun started its descent toward the mountains. It wasn't much, a weathered house with a sagging porch, a barn that needed new shingles, a chicken coop, and a corral where a few horses stood watching their approach with lazy interest. But the land stretched out in all directions, golden with late summer grass, and mountains rose in the distance like sentinels. There was space here, room to breathe. Thomas pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. "It's not fancy," he said, and Clara heard apology in his voice. "It's fine," she said, and meant it. The children tumbled out of the wagon with more energy than Clara thought possible after an 8-mile ride. They disappeared into the barn, chattering among themselves, while Thomas helped Clara down from the bench. His hand was calloused and warm around hers, and he let go the moment her feet touched ground. "I'll show you the house," he said. Inside was exactly what Clara expected, functional and neglected in equal measure. A cast-iron stove dominated the kitchen, cold and covered in a film of grease. Dishes were stacked in the basin, some of them growing creative patterns of mold. The main room held a table, chairs, and a sofa with springs poking through the upholstery. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, one for the boys, one for Lily, and one that had clearly belonged to Thomas and his wife. The bed was made with military precision, but dust covered every surface like snow. "I haven't touched her things," Thomas said from the doorway. He wouldn't step inside the room, Clara noticed, wouldn't even look at the brush still sitting on the dresser, strands of blonde hair caught in its bristles. Didn't seem right, didn't know what to do with them. "What was her name?" Clara asked softly. "Ellen," the name came out rough. "Ellen Marie Garrett. She died giving birth to a son we lost the same day, February 12th. Clara did the math, 7 months, not long at all. "I'm sorry," she said, "because what else was there?" Thomas nodded once, sharply, and turned away. "You can sleep here. I'll get my things out and set up in the barn like I said. Kids usually eat at 6. I'll introduce you proper at dinner." He was gone before Clara could respond. She spent the next 2 hours attacking the kitchen like it had personally wronged her. She scrubbed the stove until her hands ached, scoured the dishes, swept the floor, and started inventory of the pantry. There wasn't much: flour, beans, salt pork, some withered vegetables that had seen better days, but she could make it work. She found eggs in the coop, fresh milk in the cooling house, and by the time Thomas called the children in for dinner, she had biscuits baking and beans simmering with onions and the last of the salt pork. The children filed in and stopped dead, staring at the table like it held treasure instead of simple food. "You made biscuits," Samuel said, his voice full of wonder. "I did." Clara ladled beans onto plates, added biscuits, poured milk into cups. "Sit down before it gets cold." They sat, they ate like soldiers marching into battle, fast and focused and silent. Thomas ate slower, watching his children over the rim of his coffee cup with an expression Clara couldn't quite decipher. When they finished, Samuel and Jack cleared the table without being asked, and Lily carefully folded her napkin into a tiny square. "Thank you, Miss Clara," Lily said solemnly. "That was the best dinner I ever had." "Just Clara is fine." She touched the girl's tangled hair gently. "And you're welcome." After the children went to bed, Clara and Thomas sat on the porch in the cooling darkness. Crickets sang in the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out and received an answer. Thomas smoked his pipe, and Clara wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "They're good kids," Thomas said finally. "They've had a hard time of it losing their mother, but they're good." "I can see that." "They need someone who'll stay." He looked at her directly, his face half in shadow. "I meant what I said about the work being hard. Winter's coming. We got fences need mending, firewood needs cutting, 100 other things need doing. I can't pay much, can't promise easy." "I don't need easy," Clara said. "I just need somewhere to be." Thomas nodded slowly. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a while longer, listening to the night sounds, before Thomas knocked out his pipe and stood. "I'll be in the barn if you need anything. Lock the doors." Clara watched him cross the yard, his figure growing smaller until the darkness swallowed him completely. Then she went inside, locked the doors like he'd told her, and climbed the stairs to the bedroom that still smelled faintly of lavender and loss. The days fell into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Clara woke before dawn and started the stove, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, cooked breakfast for 4 growing appetites and 1 quiet man who thanked her with nods instead of words. She cleaned and mended and organized, slowly bringing order to the chaos the house had become. The children followed her like ducklings, helping with chores, asking questions, gradually letting their guard down. Samuel was serious and responsible, already trying to be the man of the house at 9 years old. Jack was wild and laughing, full of energy he didn't know how to contain. Lily was shy and watchful, testing Clara's patience with small infractions to see if she'd yell or strike or leave. Clara never yelled, never struck, never left. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk, fixing fences and tending livestock, coming in only for meals and occasionally to give quiet instructions about something that needed doing. He was polite but distant, maintaining a careful space between them that Clara didn't try to cross. She understood grief, understood the walls people built to keep it contained. But the children had no such walls. "Tell us about your mama," Lily asked one afternoon while Clara braided her finally clean hair. "She was kind," Clara said. "She laughed a lot. She made the best apple pie in the territory." "Better than yours." "Much better than mine." Lily considered this seriously. "Our mama made good pie too. Papa don't make pie at all, he just makes beans." "Your papa keeps you safe and fed and warm," Clara said gently. "That's more important than pie." "But pie's important too." Jack argued from where he was supposed to be doing arithmetic. "Can't argue with that," Clara agreed. They were sprawled around the kitchen table one evening, children working on lessons, Clara mending one of Samuel's shirts, Thomas oiling a piece of harness by lamplight, when Lily suddenly announced, "We're gonna keep you." Clara looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. Thomas froze. "Lily," he started. "We already decided," Lily interrupted with the absolute certainty only a 5-year-old could muster. "Me and Samuel and Jack, we talked about it. Papa said we could take anything we wanted from town, and we want Clara to be our new mama." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush diamonds. Clara's throat closed up tight. Samuel and Jack were staring at the table like they wanted to disappear through it. Thomas looked horrified and helpless in equal measure. "Lily," Clara said carefully, "that's not how it works." "Why not?" Lily's lower lip started to tremble. "Don't you like us?" "I love you," Clara said, and realized with shocking clarity that it was true. Somehow in 3 weeks, these children had burrowed into her heart and made themselves a home there. "I love all 3 of you, but your papa and I aren't married. I work here. It's different." "Then papa should marry you," Lily said, as if this solved everything. "Lily, that's enough." Thomas's voice was sharp enough to make all 3 children flinch. "Go on up to bed, all of you." They went, Samuel and Jack moving quickly, Lily casting one last desperate look at Clara before disappearing up the stairs. The moment they were gone, Thomas stood so abruptly his chair nearly tipped over. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'll talk to them. They shouldn't have. I didn't put them up to." "I know you didn't." "It's just that their mother," he stopped, shook his head. "Ellen was sick for a long time before she died, almost a year. They missed having someone who could just be with them, you know, someone who wasn't always tired or hurting or trying not to cry. And you're good with them, real good. They got attached too fast." "So did I," Clara admitted. Thomas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You meant it, what you said about loving them." "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face like he was reading something written there in a language he'd forgotten. "My wife was a good woman," he said finally. "Best I ever knew. When she died, I thought that was it. Thought I'd just work and raise these kids and that would be enough. Didn't think about wanting anything else. Didn't seem right to want anything else." Clara waited, barely breathing. "But the truth is, this place is falling apart," Thomas continued, "and I'm barely holding it together. And those kids need more than I can give them alone. They need someone like you, someone who knows how to make a house feel like a home again." "Thomas." "I'm not saying we have to get married tomorrow," he said quickly. "I'm not even saying we have to get married at all if that's not what you want. But if it is, if you think maybe it could be, I'd be honored. I can't promise it would be a love match. Can't promise much of anything except hard work and 3 kids who'll drive you crazy half the time. But I'd treat you right. I'd be faithful. And maybe in time, we'd figure out the rest." It was possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of marriage proposals. It was practical and honest and completely devoid of poetry. Clara had never wanted anything more in her entire life. "I'd want separate rooms at first," she said, "until we know each other better. Course. And I'd want to keep working, managing the house, helping with the ranch, not just sitting inside doing needlework." "I'd appreciate that." "And we tell the children together. We don't let them think they forced this or manipulated it. They need to understand that adults make their own choices." Thomas nodded, agreed. "Then yes," Clara said, "I'll marry you." Something that might have been relief or joy or possibly just bone-deep exhaustion crossed Thomas's face. He closed the distance between them and took both her hands in his, holding them gently like they were made of something precious. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know it's not what you probably dreamed of." "I stopped dreaming a long time ago," Clara interrupted. "This is better than dreams. This is real." They were married 3 days later by Reverend Michaels in the parlor of the ranch house, with Samuel, Jack, and Lily standing witness. Mrs. Michaels clutched her handkerchief throughout the ceremony and made several pointed comments about hasty decisions, but Clara didn't care. She wore her mother's good dress and held a bouquet of prairie wildflowers Lily had picked that morning. And when Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, she felt something inside her chest unlock and expand. The children cheered. The Reverend offered stiff congratulations, Mrs. Michaels left as quickly as propriety allowed. And Clara Brennan became Clara Garrett, wife to a quiet rancher and mother to 3 children who looked at her like she hung the moon. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and Thomas sat together on the porch like they had that first evening. The autumn air carried the smell of coming snow. The stars were scattered across the sky like spilled salt. "You scared?" Thomas asked. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "Me too." He reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. His palm was warm and calloused and steady, "but I think we'll figure it out." Clara looked at their joined hands, at the gold band glinting in the moonlight, at the house behind them full of sleeping children who had chosen her when she'd had nothing left to give. She thought about auctions and endings and the strange mercy of desperate circumstances. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think we will too." The first snow fell 2 weeks later, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching it come down while bread rose on the counter behind her and children's laughter drifted from upstairs where Thomas was helping with baths. Her reflection in the glass looked different than it had that terrible day in town, less haunted, less lost, less like something waiting to be discarded. She looked like someone who belonged. Thomas came down the stairs, his shirt wet from bath-time battles, his hair standing up in every direction. He stopped when he saw her standing there and smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. "Kids want you to read them a story," he said. "All 3 of them." All 3, they're piled into Lily's bed like puppies. Fair warning, they're gonna ask you to read the same one you read last night. Clara laughed and turned from the window. Thomas caught her hand as she passed, pulling her to a stop. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression serious. "I'm glad you climbed into that wagon," he said quietly. "So am I." He kissed her then, brief and sweet, and Clara understood that this was how love happened in real life. Not with grand gestures or passionate declarations, but with steady hands and honest words and the daily choice to stay. Upstairs, the children were calling her name. Clara went to them, Thomas following behind, and together they climbed the stairs toward the warm light and waiting voices. Behind them, the wind howled and the snow fell, and the night pressed close around their little house on the prairie. But inside, they had everything they needed. They had each other. And that, Clara thought as Lily snuggled against her side and the boys fought over who got to hold the book, was more than enough. It was everything.